All right, let's talk about quarterback hit rates in the first round. How often is a quarterback expected to be good when they are drafted with a first round pick? And your guess is probably not very often. It's hard to evaluate quarterbacks. A lot of times, quarterbacks end up being a bust. And that assumption is correct. Yeah, quarterbacks tend to not be very, they tend to have a low hit rate. And what I decided to do to test this theory, because listen, just because something is a commonly held belief doesn't mean that I want to just accept that as fact. I work in football. I should challenge some of these things. So ran just a quick little study on first-round quarterbacks and what their likelihood is to hit. So I separated all of them into 4 different categories, 4 being the best, 1 being the worst. Just real quick, what they mean is if you score a 4, that means you're great. Score a 3, that means you're good. Score a 2, that means you've added some value but aren't really that good. And 1 would be just a complete bust. So where did everyone rank? This is what I found, which is 12.5%. Weirdly, it was kind of very specific in some of these. 12.5% were great, so you had a decent amount, but not much. It's very rare for a quarterback to be great, which makes sense, right? There's very few amount of great quarterbacks in general, but still, only 25% ended up being even good. 37.5%. I screwed up my number on that. Bad job by me. But 37.5% was the number that would be added some value. Maybe had Carson Wentz was a weird one. How do you put him? I put him in 2 because you added some value, but didn't do what they hoped you would do when they drafted him. And then some guys that have kind of been backups, they're in this tier. And then about a quarter of them end up just being complete busts. So the numbers aren't great. They're not a high hit rate. 62.5% of quarterbacks don't work out. That's just the reality of the situation. You draft the quarterback in the first round, odds are they won't work out. The reason why you still do it is because if it does work out, you're in a pretty good shape. So, and considering what works out, what I'm doing is saying if you end up being in that good tier or great tier. And again, how do I quantify good or great? What makes sense to me. Well, if I consider you good or great, it's subjective, but can never have perfect objectivity in this stuff. But here's where things get interesting. So if you haven't clicked off this video yet and said, okay, got it, quarterback's hard to evaluate. They are hard to evaluate, but I was looking at quarterbacks who were drafted first overall in the time span I did, which was in a 10-year span. I skipped a couple of years just because it's too early to tell on some of the young guys how good they'll be. So I skipped the previous 2 years, and then I went back 10 years. And there wasn't a ton, not the biggest sample size in the world, but out of the first overall quarterbacks, well, let's just put them on the screen. These are the first overall picks that at the quarterback position and what their score was. And an important note is that this is not the first quarterback selected in the draft class. This is if you had to have been selected with a first overall pick. For example, the draft where Myles Garrett went 1 overall and then Mitchell Trubisky went number 2 overall. Trubisky does not make this list because he was not selected first overall. Trevor Lawrence, kind of considered a generational talent. I put him in the good tier. I think he's good. Joe Burrow has been great. Guys, went to a Super Bowl. I thought had an MVP caliber season in that year. Kyler Murray have been very good. Baker, I put Baker in the good tier. I think again, not with his current team because that's kind of a weird thing. And same thing with Goff, not with his current team. But I still think they're good quarterbacks. Jameis Winston, the only quarterback on this list who did not get in the good or great tier. So he's the only guy, and even him, guy led the league in passing yards one year, right? Like he had his flashes, just kind of couldn't consistently put it all together. And who knows? Maybe he'll get a shot with the Browns and see what he can do. Andrew Luck, who some people might put in the great tier. I never thought he really pulled. I thought he had 1 year where I would say he was great, and that was his last year, and then he retired. If he never retired, he might be a 4 as well. So maybe this is a bit too low on this stuff. So while yes, it's really hard to evaluate quarterbacks, what's weird is the first overall pick tends to be pretty successful. They have actually a really high hit rate. And, again, it's small sample size. We're talking about 7 guys here, and it's weird where if you go back 30 years, well, now we're talking about when football was basically a different sport. So it's hard to know exactly how far back you should go, which is why you have to arbitrarily cut it off at a certain point. But what this does tell me is that maybe we're not giving ourselves enough credit, and maybe there is actual reason, there is actual, we are actually better at evaluating quarterbacks than maybe I had initially thought, and maybe the no one knows what they're doing in quarterback verdict can largely stem from all of us being embarrassed that we've missed on quarterbacks in the past and want to just pretend like it's impossible, when clearly it isn't impossible. The flip side is now 76% of non-number one overall picks drafted in the first round fail. And what I mean by fail, again, is if you're kind of, not what the team drafted you to be, not a franchise quarterback and not even a franchise quarterback for another team, like how Kirk Cousins or Baker Mayfield were. I'm saying, we couldn't even do that. The numbers get worse now when you take away first overall picks. So, to some degree, this result is very much a pro-tanking result. Getting the first overall pick does give you a significant leg up in getting a good quarterback. Obviously, it's going to change year in and year out, but first overall picks, if they are quarterbacks, which doesn't happen every year, there isn't always one of those guys, but when there is a sort of an obvious great prospect, they tend to be great. If you look at the number 2 overall picks, Carson Wentz, Marcus Mariota, RG3, Mitchell Trubisky, and Zach Wilson in that same time span, none of them ended up being franchise quarterbacks. Carson Wentz was an MVP candidate, so again, he's a weird. How do you put what you could honestly make an argument he should be in any of the 4 categories, but I decided to put Trubisky in 2. I think he's done enough as a backup, at least. Maybe that's being generous. Either way. It's interesting because there is that weird drop off, and it's such a small sample size that I'm assuming that's all it is. Because I was curious, is number 2 better? No, not in this case. So it seems like it's there's a run on number 1 overall pick quarterbacks. And I don't really know what to make of all of this, really. Does it, again, to me, to some degree, it says, hey, if you're a team that stinks, maybe don't say, we'll get a top 5 pick, whatever, it's fine. Maybe try to get that number 1 overall pick. It does make a difference. And if you're a Chicago Bears fan watching this video, you're jumping for joy, saying, hey, number 1 overall pick seemingly work out at the quarterback position. I'm excited about that. But I just think it's interesting where we have this idea of, hey, who knows what's going to happen if you draft a quarterback first overall. They could, easily end up being a bust. Look, 62.5% of quarterbacks drafted in the first round don't work out. Yeah, but recently most drafted first overall have worked out. So, I don't know, just kind of an interesting thing that I stumbled upon and wanted to share with you. So, yeah, I don't have any more takeaways, but do you? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on all of this? Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.